Hello, everybody, and welcome to the EIB Benelux Pavilion here at COP28. A very warm welcome to those of you joining us here at COP, but also we have an online audience as well joining us, so we're very happy about that too. Now, today here at the COP28, one of the issues very much at the heart of the discussions is the challenge of adaptation, adapting to the effects of climate change, in particular in the most vulnerable parts of the world. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But more specifically, we're going to be looking at an approach and a model that we're very excited about, a fund called the Urban Resilience Fund, TURF, which has as its first project, a project which you're going to hear about in a minute, in its capital city, and that very much gets to the heart of the kind of thing that the European Investment Bank wants to be doing more of. So we're going to hear about that in a moment from our very esteemed panelists here. But first, I want to invite our Vice President from the European Investment Bank, the EU Climate Bank, Ambroise Fayolle, who is in charge of climate action and environmental action, as well as development, to kick us off. Ambroise.
Thank you so much, Shirin, and good afternoon to all of you. I'll be brief because I think what is the most important is to hear from the minister and from the panel. We are gathered here today to turn our attention to one of the most pressing global challenges, as you said, Shirin, which is the need to adapt to climate change. And actually today, we are very pleased at EIB to support a landmark investment in collaboration with Meridiam, the French asset manager. And we are very pleased that the CEO of Meridiam, Thierry Deo, is with us today to support climate change adaptation of the city of Nouakchott in Mauritania. Nouakchott stands as a striking example of a city grappling with the effects of climate change. Rising sea levels, increasing temperatures, and predictable, more extreme weather events pose a serious threat to its population. But in the face of adversity, there are also opportunities. And this is what Meridiam, with support of EIB, has been able to identify through the TURF, the Urban Resilience Fund, an investment that is co-created with the Rockefeller Foundation, supported by the United Nations Capital Development Fund and managed by Meridiam. It focuses on developing, investing, and managing climate and resilient, sustainable urban projects, benefiting cities and their population exposed to the effects of climate change and of growing urbanization. As you know, EIB has evolved over the last years to become the EU Climate Bank, and we have decided to first stop investing in new unabated fossil fuel projects, but also to increase significantly the level of what we finance under climate to above 50% of our funding and our financing of investments, which is actually close now to 60% of financing for investment in climate and environment. And we have also taken a last commitment that was in 21, that is to triple our commitment to adaptation in an action plan that shows that by 25 we commit to be at 15% of our climate action in financing adaptation projects. This is a really ambitious target. This is really difficult, and we need to work with all of you, with our clients, to increase the focus and work on solutions. We also need to show that adaptation and the project on adaptations can be bankable with returns for private sectors. And this is why I find TURF so interesting, because it is a possible model for us all in this endeavor. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est avec un grand honneur que je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cet événement crucial pour l'adaptation au changement climatique des villes côtières telles que Nouakchott. Et sans plus attendre, j'ai le plaisir de céder la parole à Madame la ministre Laila Ali Camara, dont l'engagement et l'expertise seront des atouts essentiels pour guider notre discussion d'aujourd'hui et pour guider la Mauritanie dans cette voie de l'adaptation. Madame la ministre, nous vous écoutons avec un grand plaisir.
Before you go, we can take a little photograph just of both of you on the stage with the panelists as well, because I know that we've got to get going, and that would be a nice thing to have. Thank you. Vasilis, do you mind doing that? Thank you. Okay.
There's a lot of technology being developed at the moment. We talk about carbon capture, we talk about wind, solar, etc. A lot of great innovation. But then you come up with these trade-offs.
So, without further ado, Madame la Ministre, I would like to invite you. We're very happy to have you joining our panel from Mauritania. You, of course, are the Minister in charge of sustainable development in Mauritania. So over to you.
Thank you for the invitation and thank you to honor my country today. I will be speaking in French. Je vous remercie la Banque européenne d'investissement, mais également Meridiam et tous les panélistes ici présents, de nous donner l'opportunité d'exposer le problème du littoral, les problématiques du littoral en Mauritanie, et également la Banque européenne d'investissement et des fonds tels que Meridiam, de s'intéresser à la question de l'adaptation en Mauritanie. Je dirais, en tout cas, le combat que nous menons pour l'adaptation versus l'atténuation est un combat de longue haleine, et nous espérons effectivement lever plus de fonds pour justement effectivement réussir cette résilience de nos populations au changement climatique. Donc la Mauritanie était jusqu'à très récemment tournée vers sa partie continentale. Mais la sécheresse, mais également l'exode rural, le développement des villes côtières et l'insertion du pays dans l'économie mondiale ont conduit, depuis les années 70, à intensifier les activités et le peuplement de la zone littorale, qui s'étend aujourd'hui, c'est 700 km de côte. Avec le développement du secteur des pêches, mais également des villes, dont l'une des plus importantes de notre pays est Nouakchott. Il faut savoir que la Mauritanie est un pays très urbanisé. 30% d'ailleurs de notre population vit à Nouakchott. Et avec l'intensification aussi des transports maritimes et terrestres, le développement des opérations pétrolières offshore, plusieurs projets sont en cours. Et enfin, l'installation d'infrastructures portuaires et énergétiques. Le littoral mauritanien concentre, comme vous pouvez le voir, les principales évolutions du pays, non seulement les enjeux de développement, mais également les enjeux économiques. Donc il est ainsi le produit territorial du développement croisé des activités halieutiques, de transport, de transformation et bientôt de tourisme, nous l'espérons. Il devient le lieu des principaux enjeux économiques et socio-économiques de notre pays. Cette urbanisation galopante, le développement des activités économiques, couplé aux effets du changement climatique, ont entraîné une dangereuse érosion côtière, mais aussi des risques d'inondation plus prononcés et plus accrus. Mais également l'effondrement du système de protection naturelle que nous avons, à savoir nos cordons dunaires. Donc, conscient de ces enjeux, mon pays a conduit un processus politique novateur par l'adoption d'abord d'une ordonnance en 2007 sur la révision du plan de directeur d'aménagement du littoral, qui a été élaboré en 2017 et actualisé sous la coordination du ministère de l'Environnement. Avec ce PDALM, et plus généralement avec une démarche, j'ai envie de dire, multisectorielle et transversale, la Mauritanie a largement anticipé les mutations à venir sur la zone côtière. Et un des défis majeurs que nous avons aujourd'hui, c'est de maintenir et de relever justement cette avancée que nous avons faite. Et c'est dans ce but que nous avons monté en 2022, avec le concours de Meridiam, donc une société que vous connaissez bien, d'économie mixte, une société d'économistes, pour l'aménagement de la ville de Nouakchott. Le ministère a également récemment créé l'Observatoire national de l'environnement et du littoral, et nous travaillons à la redynamisation du Conseil consultatif littoral qui a été institué en 2010. La mise en œuvre du plan de développement du PDL et son plan d'investissement sont également une de nos priorités. Et tout ceci inclut tout particulièrement la mise en place de directives d'aménagement du littoral pour les villes côtières, que sont Nouakchott, Nouadhibou, mais également Rosso, et la systématisation des études d'impact environnemental pour tout projet installé sur la zone côtière. La gestion de la zone littorale implique de nombreux acteurs, comme vous le savez, non seulement des acteurs locaux, nationaux, mais également aujourd'hui internationaux, et qu'ils soient du secteur privé ou public, et ces acteurs, les acteurs également de la société civile et les communautés locales. Ce qui nécessite non seulement des plans, je dirais, bien ficelés, mais également la mobilisation de l'expertise technique internationale appropriée. Et pour cela, et compte tenu de la responsabilité du ministère de l'Environnement quant à l'animation interinstitutionnelle, parce qu'on implique également le ministère des Pêches, mais également le ministère de l'Urbanisme, le ministère de la Défense également, qui a des intérêts sur la côte, pour mettre en œuvre une gestion spatiale intégrée littorale. Et donc nous envisageons dans ce cadre la mise en œuvre de nos plans d'aménagement du littoral, suivant la vision de son Excellence le Président de la République, mais également suivant la stratégie nationale de l'environnement et du développement durable qui a été élaborée en 2020 et notre CDN révisée en 2021. Donc je tiens ici vraiment à saluer la compréhension de Meridiam, mais également de la Banque européenne d'investissement, de l'opportunité que représente vraiment le littoral mauritanien. En investissant dans cette société, également, nous espérons que d'autres projets vont suivre, à savoir la gestion des déchets, par exemple. Donc, à travers l'investissement de ce fonds TURF, nous voulons vraiment prouver à nos partenaires techniques et financiers qu'aujourd'hui, la Mauritanie est prête à recevoir des investissements conséquents avec des compétences internationales. C'est le mot que je tenais aujourd'hui à communiquer à l'ensemble des panélistes, également aux participants, parce que nous venons chaque année à ces COP et pour surtout lever de l'argent public, mais de plus en plus, je pense qu'il est primordial pour des pays comme la Mauritanie de s'adjoindre également les compétences du secteur privé. Voilà, je vous remercie et je vous souhaite une bonne continuation. Je vais devoir m'éclipser, mais je ne doute pas effectivement de l'importance et de l'intérêt de vos présentations. À bientôt.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Ministre. Thank you so much to Madam Minister Camara, who of course is the Minister for Environment and Sustainable Development in Mauritania. Now I'm going to pass my microphone over to you, Stelios. That's for you. And I'm going to put myself here. So we've got a little bit of a taste there of the context in which we're going to be discussing why we think this could be an interesting approach when it comes to financing adaptation in cities, particularly in the most vulnerable parts of our world's geography. Let me first of all introduce you to our panel. So we have Thierry Diot, who is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Meridiam, who is, of course, the asset manager managing this turf fund. Delighted to have you. We have just here Stelios Grafakos, who's the principal economist at the Global Green Growth Institute. Then we also have, Roger's over there, but we have Peter Hall, who is leading the team at the Rockefeller Foundation, which is one of the initiators of this fund, a team known as the Resonance Impact Advisory. Melina Messouri from the European Investment Bank is the director of our Corporate Finance and Global Activities Department, so the part of the European Investment Bank that actually is dealing with these kinds of funds. And of course, we also have Roger van den Berg, a big partner of the EIB from the World Resources Institute, Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, of which you are the global director. So thank you all very much for joining us. Let me kick off with you, Thierry, if I could. What is it about the TURF Fund? I guess there's a clue in the fact that it stands for urban resilience. But what is it about the way the financing is working that could potentially give us a model when we are looking for, as the Vice President said, bankable urban adaptation projects? Because this almost seems like the holy grail in a way.
All right, thank you for inviting me today to talk about this great initiative that we have together. The TURF Fund, I think it really starts with some facts. When we were in our strategy to address SDGs and contributing, when we were looking at the most vulnerable places where you have the most people vulnerable, it really turned to cities and urban areas in many of the emerging market countries. And at the same time, we could see that they were underinvested because we're talking about sub-sovereign, we're talking about cities who often don't have the capacities to develop such projects and address their vulnerable population. meeting minds with Rockefeller Foundation. We've actually launched this fund to address two issues in terms of bankability. One is this capacity issue that there is at the level of municipal or urban level, and this is also where we were joined by the UNCDF along the way, which was, it's a fund that is in two funds in a way. There is a pocket that is called the Catalytic Capital Facility, and this particular facility has been funded by the Rockefeller, but also by PIDGE and the US government through DFC. And that allows us to actually support cities in preparing projects and identifying really where the vulnerability is and how feasible these things are. So this facility is about a 20 million or so revolving facility. And then the fund itself, it's there to really invest. And the fund is somehow the epiphany of blended finance. And this is where the European Investment Bank comes into this, because together with the Rockefeller Foundation provided a first loss piece for this fund, and the US government with DFC, a senior tranche to actually enhance return. So it was really addressing investors' concern when investing in emerging markets, sub-sovereign and adaptation, which are sort of three recipes for disaster if you don't really address them, and really providing a structure where investors could have reasonable returns with the risk reward being satisfying for them, de-risking the opportunity with the first loss, and at the same time enhancing a bit the return from a senior tranche perspective. So this whole blended finance pool made it possible to attract private investors into a pool of capital that can actually be really invested for the long term in adaptation projects. And I think the long-term bit is quite important, because adaptation, the recovery of returns, if you want, takes a while, and we'll talk about it while we discuss this particular Nouakchott project, but it's important to have the de-risking issue, but the long-term perspective, as well as the upfront development and the support to cities and government in terms of really preparing projects for the best.
I mean, that is crucial, isn't it? It's not a get-rich-quick scheme at all. It is about also conditioning your investors to understand that this is a different kind of investment, but equally that they're not throwing their money away, right?
Yep. Exactly. I mean, we want to give them, what we try to do is give our investors the same sort of risk-reward balance that they would have in another typical fund of infrastructure in emerging markets, obviously recreating the risk balance and the reward balance with these different tranches, but also helping the pipeline by having this upfront facility, which is quite critical and catalytic in a way to make sure that adaptation projects that require quite a lot of work upfront can actually emerge.
And that is obviously what we do need more of. So let's come back to how that might work with a project like the Nouakchott one. But maybe I turn to Peter Hall first from the Rockefeller Foundation. So, I mean, it's an incredible jigsaw, isn't it? It's in itself an extraordinary achievement to have got all these different pieces together and have leveraged different kinds of international funds. So tell us a bit more about that and what actually attracted the Rockefeller Foundation into this kind of setup and how it sort of works with your own values, in a sense, your own aims.
Probably a couple things. One, and you're hearing about this week, we need like 10 to 18 times, I think, more funding for projects in the Global South. So there's a huge gap. There's a huge adaptation gap. And as Terry was saying, I mean, a lot of these infrastructure projects, you have to build them right up front because they last a long time. So I think it was matching, the gap in infrastructure with this, gap around bankable projects. But one of the really innovative things, I think, and we work with them for a couple of years, really building a resilient screen, which is a key part of the TURF fund. So you have the financing, but then what's the mechanism where you can look at a project early, and that's really important. We look at these projects very early stage. And the screen really was, our challenge was create a screen that won't take weeks to do, that we can run it through any project, any type of infrastructure project. And honestly, we look at how the governance is. So how is the project going to be managed, run locally? Can it be permitted and built? Look at climate risks for the long term. So the right climate risks, the right multi-hazard risks over the right time frame. And then a couple of unique things, and we looked at a lot of different screens and found that these two things really weren't addressed. It can't generate negative consequences while it's being built. And then the fourth one is probably the most important. It has to deliver co-benefits. We call them co-benefits. So infrastructure is more than just what it is. It's like what it does. So the infrastructure has to deliver, and in the project we're talking about today, it has to deliver jobs, health impacts, basically create opportunities for the community. So co-benefits. Then we look at all those. We screen projects we early on and help prepare them for the investment committee, and that process is, I think, a bit unique, but it really helps solve this bankable projects gap.
And do you see TURF and this particular project actually as a model? Are you looking at it from the Rockefeller Foundation to see how it turns out and perhaps that it could be replicated?
Yeah, exactly. The idea that if you do it once in the right setting with the right kind of governance and you do it well, then it's scalable, almost like you've de-risked other projects like that.
Yeah.
Not just in the Global South, it could be anywhere. So absolutely, and the unique thing on this one too is that it addressed coastal impacts, heat. You're hearing about extreme heat a lot here at COP, in the intersection with economic opportunity. So it has a lot of scalable benefits to other cities.
Maybe I can turn to Milena now. To what extent did this sort of take the EIB out of its comfort zone? Blended finance is not particularly new, but maybe in this sphere it is a little. Tell us why the EIB decided to go for this and what it was that the EIB was looking for or made it go for it.
Yeah, and thank you, Sharon. Indeed, as you said, investing in a layered fund is not new for the EIB. We do that, we have done that. Obviously, it's what attracted our attention in this specific case was that we were confronted with a fund with a novel strategy. The novelty of the strategy in investing in climate adaptation in cities in the Global South. This was what really made the difference. And in this specific case, we were partnering with Meridiam, a counterpart that we know quite well because we have invested in a number of funds done by Meridiam, but we were accompanying, if you allow me, Thierry, Meridiam into a new space, something that you had not explored before. And that was really the role of the EIB, being also a catalyst for others. This was coming from the fact that we could invest in the junior tranche thanks to our partnership with the Luxembourgish government. Thanks to our partnership with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Environment, we are managing a platform. It's the Luxembourg Climate Fund platform that allows us to take junior position in funds like TURF that have a focus on climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And let me say that climate adaptation has become more and more important for the EIB. We have made a commitment a couple of years ago to triple our investment in climate adaptation. And this is a concrete example of what we can finance. There are certainly other examples that we were able to finance in the meantime, but this specific one in Nouakchott is the first example that we can bring to the table.
And it's really, not giving away a trade secret to say that achieving that goal of tripling adaptation finance by 2025 is going to be extremely difficult, isn't it, Melina?
It is absolutely not a given. And we need not only to find the right projects, but these right projects have to bring the returns that we are expecting them to bring, not just in terms of impact, but also financial returns. We are ultimately an equity investors in this fund, and we want to see our money back.
Let me turn to you, Roger, from the World Resources Institute, just to give us a bit more context about the kind of challenges that cities are facing on the ground. So what is it that cities need to do or need to have, one of the two, in terms of helping them to actually able to benefit from funds like this as well? Is it access to finance? Is it technical capacity? Is it both? Give us a perspective on the kind of work that you've been doing on this area.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me first applaud this turf, right? EIB, Rockefeller, Meridiam, because money is what cities need.
Right.
And it's yesterday the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is a group of institutions and cities partners looking at the state of climate finance in cities, brought out a report. And again, it shows that less than 1% of climate finance actually lands in cities. And that's really very concerning, especially if you know that we all know that the majority of people, the majorities of cities will grow at high speeds with populations that are most vulnerable to climate impacts. You talked about heat, of course, water challenges, too much, too little, polluted water. So how do you actually bring finance into cities? And turf is a very good example of that. I think for cities, we work with 100 to 150 cities every year. And we have projects on urban water resilience specifically in Africa. And we've been for long-term working for the last 2-3 years working with 6 cities in Ethiopia and South Africa and in Rwanda to help them to build resilience in these cities. And I think a big challenge for someone, can you imagine that you are a planner, a bureaucrat, an officer in Dirdawa, a secondary city in Ethiopia, and you need to build resilience, you need to find the funds in a very complex web of 35 to 38 available funds, on the African continent. That's really challenging. So that's one thing. So the upstream support of helping them to understand what is available, but also to do the matchmaking of the finance in a right way. Because there's really a lot of stupid business cases, really. There's a lot of stupid projects around. And the complexity is, if we really want to tackle adaptation, that this kind of more systemic approach, not piping in the water in an informal settlement here, while you kind of deplete the water resources just outside of the city, this is serious complex space. So that means, and this is what we've done with many cities, do a rapid process where you can help them to plan in a more systemic way, come with a set of priorities that make sense, in the context of interdependencies, and then help to come to financing. And then, of course, you get a whole trajectory of making a project bankable, of which the last 10 years, every panel about finance ends up, we need bankable projects. Now, we need propositions like turf to help cities to develop bankable and not shovel-ready, shovel-worthy projects, right? And that systemic approach it's a tricky one because it relates to how you deal with the water system, how you deal with nature, how you deal with land use. But we've also shown that you can do, if you really are dedicated in a few months, bringing all the stakeholders together around a systemic approach, you can come to a couple of reasonable priorities and projects.
Thank you for that. And clearly, key word that jumped out at me there was, the matchmaking, that the kind of platform that does that, whether turf itself is a platform that can do that or whether it's part of a platform. But it's something maybe, Stelios, you can also develop a little bit, because maybe there is scope in some of the work you're doing for that. You're working, I know, with many cities and countries on advising them around their national determined contributions, what we know as the NDCs, which get a lot of publicity here at COP. Maybe a little less so is the adaptation national plans, the NAPs. Have faith in your microphone. I think if you speak in it, it will work.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
oh,
we
yeah.
can.
Perfect.
So give us a sense of, coming on from what Roger was saying a little bit. What do cities need and how can that process help them?
Absolutely. I would like to echo what Roger mentioned about the systemic approach and the importance of planning. And from our experience working directly with governments, for people that they don't know, the Global Green Growth Institute, an intergovernmental international organization that works directly with governments, meaning that our staff act as trusted advisors and are embedded in ministries, normally Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Energy, Finance, also strong ministries, which is very important in the discussion we have. We do have this advantage to be able to understand the needs and the gaps within the governments. And as you mentioned, we do support the national adaptation plans, and not only we work directly with governments, but also we try to have the more global perspective, so we conduct also some research. So I can give you some highlights that gives the big picture on the national adaptation plans. We conducted with our partners a global assessment of national adaptation plans, 45 that they had submitted to the UNFCCC up to September 23. And we got some interesting findings. So although the plans, the official national adaptation planning documents, they score well on setting the goals, on the fact base like vulnerability assessment and risk assessment, on selecting the adaptation measures. However, they score low when it comes to participation of stakeholders, and I think this is key, and this is one of the needs and gaps that we identify, on setting monitoring and evaluation systems, and lastly on finance. And finance, it's the least scored criterion or category, if you want.
Which is highly frustrating, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because the idea is not just to make a plan to tick the box.
Exactly.
The idea is to develop the plan to move to implementation. Therefore, finance should be embedded in the national adaptation plans. And this is something we're missing. But it is more frustrating, I have to say, because we did also a study with our partners at urban climate adaptation plans in European cities. 327 adaptation plans in cities. Similar findings, we saw that they score relatively low also on implementation and finance, around 45% compared to the highest score, right? And furthermore, even lower on public participation and participation of vulnerable groups, 7% of the highest score. And this is developed cities or cities in European countries. Imagine in the global south, right? So I think those findings, although from a global perspective, they give a good picture of the gaps and needs, both at the national level, but also at the urban level.
And just before I turn a corner a little bit, what do we do about it? That's a bit depressing. I mean, clearly we need to translate those national adaptation plans into proper investment programs, right? But who's going to do it?
Sure.
Anyone got any ideas?
quickly, from our experience, I think, as you mentioned before, finance should be there. Ministry of Finance should be there, so it should be a cross-ministerial process. And also, often what we don't see is this multi-level governance issue is another important element, and alignment of adaptation policies at the urban level with the national level.
Roger, you might want to come in here.
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, this is really timely that you're saying this, because this is the big challenge, right? How to get national governments and subnationals work together to implement climate action, both mitigation as well as the adaptation side. And it's great, this COP, we saw this first local climate action summit, and it's very interesting to see that 64 countries, they pledged and they committed to a project which is called CHAMP, a coalition of high ambition, multi-level partnerships. That means that towards 2025, towards renewing their NDCs and NAPs, they are committed to kind of be part of a process and a dialogue of bringing national authorities closer to subnationals in order to implement, because you can't do one without another. It's simply impossible, and there's the crux, and also an important crux of letting the finance actually flow, because it often comes in at the national level through sovereign guarantee, and then needs to get to cities and regions.
Let's go down to the community level now. And the fact is, politicians are well aware that without the buy-in from the local communities, without clear benefits, none of this is going to work. And that's where the project that we're talking about is also very exciting. The place that the community has in the Nouakchott coastline project. So Thierry, maybe I can ask you a little bit more to tell us a bit more about that project and how you have ensured that the community will benefit, how that is both along the process, as you were saying earlier, but also in what's delivered to local people in terms of benefits.
Yes, first we've approached the city in terms of understanding what their issue in terms of adaptation. Floods, coastal line being eroded, and a number of transportation issues together. So we sort of launched a pre-focus study to actually help them identify really the project and what we could do. That really came out, and we're only talking about one piece, but 3 projects came out of it. One on wastewater and drainage, the other one on waste, actually, and the management of waste, and the third, the coastal line protection. And clearly, this process, other than bringing funds and international expertise around the city, was also a moment of engagement with a number of stakeholders. The fish market, I don't know whether you've ever done consultation in the fish market, it's quite interesting. The industrial zone that is close there and that could be extended within the new sort of area that will be developed, and a number of commercial development and potential commercial development. So it took quite a few months to actually get everyone sort of, what do I get out of it, beyond the flood protection and the whole thing, to come up with, okay, this is what we're going to be focusing on this project. So the result of that is really to carry the project, a joint venture 50-50 between the government and the fund, to actually develop the protection. The government is bringing the land as their contribution, and we're bringing the funds to actually build the dike and then build the area. So what was also the purpose of the whole study? It's identifying the sources of revenues over the long term that can help fund this, because we're Rockefeller is a charity, but Meridiam is not a charity.
No, exactly. I was going to say, you're not just doing this out of the goodness of your heart, right?
And actually, our goal is that we can also be successful in this fund to repay Rockefeller of their capital so they can reuse it on something else and perhaps the next one. And that's very important in the whole setting. In terms of how we engage with the cities and how we develop things. So really finding the sources of revenues from, if we're going to reinstall the fish market, how do we collect revenues to actually justify building this protection? When it comes to the industrial zone, same thing, you're talking about commercial development with an industrial zone that needed room to expand, but it's also a different discussion when you want to do just public parks, for example, for the city and the municipality. How are they going to fund that out of fiscal space if they do have, even if they have to pay for it over the very long term? So all of these revenue streams, we had to sort of identify, collect, and put together to make sure that the investment that we're making at the beginning could come back with returns over 20 years. And this is why the importance of the long term, because all these things will take 3 to 5 years to develop the entire sort of ecosystem that will provide these revenues and the benefit to the constituency and to the stakeholders. So, and again, this is a joint management with government as well in one company. I mean, obviously, we are running it operationally and really running the system and bringing all the expertise to set out construction contract, for example, and the highest standards, and make sure we're running things efficiently and not necessarily going back to government processes that could, be a killjoy. But all that in full cooperation and making sure we have regular with the broader stakeholder group, regular sort of checkpoints in terms of where this is going.
I mean, that I guess is exactly why this makes it such an interesting project. And I wonder whether, Rockefeller and Meridiam, do you have fights behind closed doors, or do you find you're always on the same level? Because you are bringing together two, very different contexts, very different backgrounds, which if it works, will be great.
Well, I think we report to the head of ESG for Meridiam, Jeanette, and it's actually, and Pidge is also on the Resilience Committee, and we meet regularly on the projects. And no, in the screen actually provides the framework. So it provides the structure, like you were mentioning, a lack of, maybe community engagement. Like the screen, we specifically look at how can this project improve opportunities for women, vulnerable populations. The fish market was unique because it was an opportunity to create economic benefits for, marginalized, people in the community. The other really interesting thing it does, it almost forms, and we work with the asset managers, so we walk through the form. Sometimes there's a couple iterations as we go back and forth. It's called the Resilience Valuation Review. But it's a process that can be replicated. The other interesting thing in this project that can be scalable is, getting through weeds a little. I mean, that roadway, it's a revenue stream. And when you use that to plant vegetation, nature-based solutions, you reduce heat. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think that the number, like 75,000 people are going to be protected from, lowland flooding just from the project itself. And then on top of that, you have, improved benefits for heat reduction. You've got improved benefits from the viability of the fish market. And it also highlights how important it is to look at projects, not just designing it and providing capital to get it built, but the operation, the maintenance, and the long-term delivery of the project, because you're looking at a longer time horizon. So the screen really pushes us in a really nice way to really identify local partners. So it really, for this to work, you have to have local partners and within the city. So we're working with different agencies in the cities in a collaborative way. So, one thing doesn't get done, that's the negative consequences piece. You're not doing one thing that's going to, be detrimental to another agency. And so, it's been working really well.
Melina, what is the EIB hoping to get out of this project in terms of not just, finance, but in terms of outcome, impact?
Yes, Shirin, I would like to mention that actually later this week, the EIB will announce its just resilience approach. Starting already in 2024, our aim is to support our partner countries, specifically the least developed countries, the small island developing countries, the conflict-affected countries in becoming resilient to climate change. But the approach is not just global, is also very much local. We want to see results at the level of the communities. We want to see the opportunities for people to redeploy their efforts into new businesses, for example, if they have been affected by climate change. The point is to see very much how we can support local communities, and I think that a project like the Nouakchott is a very emblematic project. And so far is, for us, one of the few investments on the ground, because the EIB has a number of opportunities for supporting climate adaptation with technical assistance. And I would invite, whoever has the need to be supported in bringing forward project for climate adaptation to reach out to us. But when it comes to actual investments that are showing that climate adaptation is not just providing benefits, but also providing financial returns, we are very much counting on this one.
Keeping with this theme of how we involve the community, particularly those most vulnerable parts of the community, Stelios, we talked about, you used that phrase, box ticking. How do we ensure that the involvement of communities, the idea of inclusion, it's very used, that it's real and that it's actually, factored into the discussions you're having, for example, with the cities and the countries on those, wider, apparently, strategies?
That's a very good point and very good question. So participation, inclusion is not something to tick the box, but it's something that will enhance the acceptability and the success in the end of an adaptation plan or of an adaptation project design. So the most vulnerable communities or vulnerable communities should be engaged from the very beginning of the adaptation planning process. And I have a couple of examples also from GGGI's work. For instance, in Kampala for an urban forestry project, we engage with participatory urban planning. In essence, different stakeholders and vulnerable communities together through the process we're planning how to adapt to climate change. And this provides many additional benefits, so to say, in the process. So this is more acceptable by the communities. You better understand the potential co-benefits of a project, and when you design a project, you enhance the capacity of the people engaged in the process. They understand how we move from planning to implementation and finance. And of course, there are also other ways. For instance, in those countries and these cities, often there is lack of data for vulnerability assessment or risk assessment. So you turn to community to understand what are the risks they face, their perceptions. So at the same time, you generate knowledge, you collect data, and at the same time, you engage with them from the very beginning.
And that was the process that Thierry was describing, I think, which is undoubtedly a long, painstaking one. And that's another issue, I guess, for those partners who are involved in this. I want to bring you in, Roger, on that issue. And I guess the challenge of delivering, but also of incentivizing these investments. Hold on one sec. I just want to check in case anyone in the audience has a question. You'll have another chance. If not, I'm going to go straight to Roger. So what about that? How do we actually deliver? Do you want to pick up on Stelios's point here?
Yeah, I think everything. I agree with everything said here. I think you need to be very careful not to reinvent participatory engagement trajectories. There's a lot of partners on the ground. I mean, I'm speaking here for a larger urban water resilience initiative in Africa that we have now in 12 to 15 cities, and that's expanding. First of all, we have country offices there with kind of local professionals that drive this this program. But we are not a community engagement organization, right? We're a think and a do tank. We know how to figure out the difficult stuff. Same counts for turf. So I think building this very local and city partnerships is really crucial, and there are quite a few around, and they can really help, driving this kind of community engagement, work with SMEs. There's a lot of SMEs in the water sector, for example, especially if you look in Africa, where 50% and in some cases 2/3 of the urban area is an informally structured city. So I think these partnerships are very important, and through our initiative, for example, we created a platform that includes 25 partners that can deliver underwater challenges in cities. And we all know, developing a partnership like that you can really count on a partner to deliver, through a framework that you've developed together is a tough one. So if you have it, you need to cherish it. The second thing is that I think, and that is also a question on also maybe for turf. I talked in the beginning on systemic change, but you see, if you look at heat or look at water, and look at the investment needed to help communities build resilience, some of them are very impactful, but are not high tickets, right? They're not 100 million, they're not 50 million. Some are either few million or even less. But that can really, in terms of nature, household level rainwater harvesting, nature for wastewater, decentralized wastewater treatment, nature for stormwater management, and these are very job-rich interventions. And I think one of the, and you mentioned it, the opportunity for create economy, but the economy is often not part of the financial business case, right? So on one hand, how do you deal with the small tickets and the complexity of aggregating them? And I know this is people like me love that concept, and I know that it's financially extremely challenging. But still, a lot of these smaller projects have a huge opportunity to connect to the local communities, can drive businesses, but they have a different kind of financial architecture. And I think that is still a challenge that we see in our initiatives, how to get that right, and to get also, as I said, get the funding to these right type of projects. And some of them are innovative in the sense that they have not been tried enough. We all talk about nature, but it's very difficult to get the business case of nature closed, right?
Yes, absolutely. Do you want to come back,
Well,
Peter?
I agree, and this is actually another example of de-risking a project. You spend more money up front on listening to what the local community needs and investing in that upfront stakeholder engagement. And this is gets to the resilience return on investment idea. You spend that money up front, and you build the best project. Some of these interventions, I mean, they could be something as simple as, rain barrels for flooding, but you have to do them at the right time. That's the other thing. You need to listen. Oftentimes a lot of the great ideas come from the local community is one, asking the right questions. And then a lot of times you have to get these in early. So you have to prioritize those, do them at the right time. And some of these are fairly easy, but you got to spend the money up front so you can get them into the project, so it can get delivered and get implemented.
Milena.
No, I totally concur. I think the focus has to be on the ecosystem, no? And then we shouldn't forget that, and not just looking things as a whole instead of the different and specific intervention.
And Thierry, I mean, just to wrap up in a sense with you and Stelios, I think something Stelios said, I think, was the absolute connection between the social return and the economic return. And that, in the end, coming back to turf and this project is the point, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we are looking both for real impact and real returns. So, and those two things go together. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the initial investment is the enabler, but it's the whole ecosystem that you develop around it. I mean, from nature to other social issues, is what really brings this sort of full set of benefits. And really, I mean, you were asking what EIB was looking for into this, and I've been collaborating with EIB for more than 20 years. That just tells my age, but but we've always collaborated on innovative, bold innovation, and also EIB has been really supporting scaling up initiatives. I mean, from 2006, really focusing on trans-European network transport, supported us at the end of COP21, which was early for transition, in a transition fund and really deploying into new technologies like EV charging at the time. So I think that role that the bank plays is fundamental in terms of supporting this sort of initiative that needs a lot of tweaking at the beginning to scale them and sort of standardize them and then be able to deploy them across.
And I mean, without wanting to advertise the EIB too much, is that in a catalyzing role, or is it also in advising as well?
It's in many, many different ways, because there are quite a number of capabilities within EIB in terms of catalytic expertise, but also in terms of a different product. And I would say EIB has broadened the range of intervention from the financial products that were classically senior debt back in the days to equity to a number of subordinated instruments that are very useful in the value chain to support things like this, where risk need to identify and address very specifically versus the big bulldozer. So that's very catalytic.
And of course, we're in the Luxembourg Shared Pavilion, and it's also due to partnerships with countries like
Indeed.
Luxembourg that the EIB is also able to come in through the climate finance platform. I'm going to give the last word to you, Stelios. I mean, looking at where we are at COP23, to what extent do you think sorry, not COP23, I'm going back many years now. I'm having a Groundhog Day here.
Now.
Yeah, 28. What do you think you would like to see coming out of this COP that could actually have some impact on creating a better environment for these kinds of initiatives to take off, to be scaled up, and to replicate? I'm throwing you that question. I didn't give it to you before, but give us a sense of what you think should be coming out of this COP.
Well, that's a difficult question somehow. I mean, to capture in 1 minute. So obviously, finance, particularly for the most vulnerable, is very important, and how we leverage this finance through additional innovative financing that we heard today. I think this is key. So finance for adaptation, for loss and damage. Already we heard some pledges, which is very encouraging. Is not enough. We need more, and of course, we need more adaptation in order to have less loss and damage, right? So as we heard also at the beginning, already the financial flows on adaptation globally lag behind the needs, and we need to increase that by 6 times by 2030. So certainly, in the context of adaptation, this is very important. And again, looking on cities, because there is lack of information of how financial flows for adaptation reach cities and the most vulnerable. So I hope this also could be one of the outcomes of the CAP, along other, of course, important key messages and activities around mitigation and reduction of emissions.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good place to end this panel discussion. We've managed in a short amount of time to cover a lot of ground, from the local to the subnational to the national and international. I'm really grateful to the panelists. Thank you for helping us. For those of you who've been watching, you can re-watch again and again if you like. You'll find the panel on the YouTube channel of EIB. And on that note, thank you very much and see you all soon. Thanks a lot. Cheers.